I pulled into my childhood driveway after driving 8 hours from college, excited to surprise my family for spring break. The familiar sight of our two-story colonial house with its blue shutters should have felt welcoming, but something seemed off. Through the living room window, I could see my mother Janet pacing frantically, while my 19-year-old sister Emma sat crying on the couch. I grabbed my duffel bag and bounded up the front steps, eager to find out what was wrong and offer comfort. The moment I opened the front door, my mother whirled around with a look of pure rage I had never seen before. "How could you do this to your own sister?" My mother screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "How could you steal from Emma's college fund?" I stood frozen in the doorway, rainwater from my jacket dripping onto the hardwood floor I had helped my father install 3 summers ago. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, completely incomprehensible. "What are you talking about, Mom? I just got here. I haven't stolen anything from anyone." Emma looked up from the couch, her mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. She pointed a trembling finger at me and sobbed, "Don't lie, Wesley. The bank called. They said you withdrew $5,000 from my account last week, using your access from when we shared that joint savings account." My mind raced, trying to process this information. Emma and I had opened a joint account when I turned 18 to help her save money for college, but I hadn't touched it in over a year. I pulled out my phone to check my recent transactions, but my mother snatched it from my hands. "Don't you dare try to delete evidence," she snarled. "Emma showed me the bank statements. Your signature is all over the withdrawal slips." "But I was in Colorado Springs last week for a geology field study. I have dozens of witnesses. My professor, my classmates, the hotel receipts. I couldn't have been at our bank here in Denver." Emma's crying intensified. "Stop making excuses. I needed that money for my textbooks and housing deposit for next semester. Now, I might have to drop out because of what you did." I looked around the room, desperately searching for some sign that this was an elaborate prank or misunderstanding. The family photos on the mantelpiece smiled back at me mockingly. Pictures of our camping trips to Rocky Mountain National Park, Christmas mornings, my high school graduation. All those memories felt like lies now. "Where's Dad? He'll listen to reason. He knows I would never steal from Emma." "Your father is in Phoenix on business until Friday," my mother said coldly. "And when he gets back, he'll be just as disgusted with you as I am." I tried to approach Emma, hoping to comfort her and figure out what really happened, but my mother stepped between us like a protective shield. "Don't you dare get near her. You've done enough damage." The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing fury. Lightning illuminated the darkening sky, and thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. I could hear our neighbor Mrs. Henderson's wind chimes clanging violently on her front porch. "Mom, please. Just give me a chance to prove I didn't do this. We can call the bank together. We can check security cameras. There has to be some mistake." But my mother had already marched to my old bedroom upstairs. I heard drawers slamming and hangers scraping against the closet rod. She returned with my arms full of clothes, tossing them toward the front door in a heap. "I want you out of this house, right now." "You can't be serious. It's pouring rain, and I drove 8 hours to get here. Can we at least wait until morning to sort this out?" Emma stood up from the couch, wiping her nose with a tissue. "Wesley, just admit what you did. Maybe Mom will let you stay if you apologize and promise to pay me back." The suggestion that I should confess to something I didn't do felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My own sister was asking me to lie, to accept blame for a crime I never committed. "I won't apologize for something I didn't do, Emma. And I'm shocked that you think I would steal from you after everything we've been through together." My mother continued throwing my belongings toward the door. My old baseball trophies, books from high school, even the framed photo of Emma and me at her senior prom when I was her date, because her boyfriend got sick. She handled each item with disgust, as if they were contaminated. "I don't want to hear another word from you," she said, opening the front door wide. The wind immediately whipped rain into the entryway, soaking the welcome mat our family had picked out together last Christmas. I gathered my soggy clothes and stuffed them into my duffel bag, my hands shaking from cold and disbelief. As I stepped onto the front porch, my mother called after me. "You're not welcome in this house anymore, Wesley. Don't bother coming back until you're ready to tell the truth and make this right." The door slammed behind me with such force that the decorative wreath my mother made every spring fell to the porch floor. I stood there for several minutes, hoping she would open the door and tell me this was all a horrible mistake. But the house remained dark and silent, except for the storm. I stumbled to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, and sat in the driver's seat, watching rain cascade down the windshield. Through the living room window, I could see my mother comforting Emma, stroking her hair, the way she used to comfort me when I had nightmares as a child. My phone buzzed with a text message. I hoped it might be my mother apologizing, but instead, it was from my college roommate Marcus, asking how my surprise visit was going. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Change of plans. Can I crash at your place tonight?" 20 minutes later, I was standing in Marcus's cramped studio apartment above the pizza shop, where he worked part-time, trying to explain the most surreal evening of my life. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "Dude, that makes absolutely no sense," he said, handing me a dry towel and some of his clothes. "Your sister has always been cool when I've met her, and your mom seemed really proud of you at graduation last year." That's what I thought too. But you should have seen the hatred in her eyes, Marcus. Like I was some stranger who had broken into their house. Marcus fired up his laptop and pulled up Emma's social media profiles. "Let's see what your sister has been up to lately. Maybe there are some clues." As we scrolled through Emma's recent posts, a pattern began to emerge that made my stomach sink. Photos of expensive dinners at upscale restaurants downtown. Designer handbags and shoes with price tags that would cost more than my monthly rent. Shopping trips to boutiques that catered to Denver's wealthy socialites. "When did Emma start having this kind of money?" Marcus asked, pointing to a photo of her wearing a watch that looked like it cost several $1,000s. "She doesn't. At least she's not supposed to. She works part-time at a coffee shop and gets some money from our parents for school expenses, but nothing that would cover this lifestyle." Marcus pulled up her posts from 6 months ago, and the contrast was stark. Previous photos showed Emma studying in the library, eating ramen noodles in her dorm room, complaining about being broke, and having to buy used textbooks. "Something definitely changed," Marcus observed. "And look at this." He pointed to a geotag on one of Emma's recent photos. Instead of being taken at the university library, where she claimed to spend most of her time, the location showed a casino on the outskirts of Denver. "Your sister might be gambling," Marcus said quietly. The possibility hit me like ice water. If Emma had developed a gambling problem, she might need someone to blame for missing money. But that would mean she was deliberately framing me destroying our family to cover her own mistakes. I spent that first night on Marcus's couch staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face twisted with disgust and disappointment. The woman who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had cheered at every baseball game, who had cried with pride when I got accepted to college, now believed I was a thief. Outside, the storm continued to rage, matching the turmoil in my heart. The next morning, I woke up determined to prove my innocence and uncover the truth about what had really happened to Emma's money. Marcus had already left for his early shift at the pizza shop, leaving me alone with my laptop and a growing sense of urgency. I started by logging into my online banking account, something I rarely did since my finances were straightforward. What I discovered made my blood run cold. There were several transactions I had never authorized, all occurring in the past 2 months. Small withdrawals of $200 and $300, carefully spaced apart to avoid detection. The transactions appeared to be from ATMs located around Denver, near places I had never visited. One withdrawal was made from a machine outside a pawn shop on the east side of town. Another came from an ATM inside a convenience store near the university where Emma attended school. I called my bank immediately, speaking with a customer service representative named Jennifer, who sounded genuinely concerned when I explained the situation. "Mr. Thompson, I see several irregularities in your account activity," she said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "These transactions were all made using a debit card that was reported as replacement for a lost card 3 months ago. I never reported my card as lost. I have it right here in my wallet." "That's very strange. The request came from someone claiming to be you, providing all the correct personal information, including your social security number and mother's maiden name." My hands started shaking as I realized the implications. Someone had been impersonating me, someone who had access to my most personal information. The only people who would know those details were family members. Jennifer transferred me to the Fraud Investigation Department, where I spoke with a specialist named Robert, who asked me to come into the branch immediately to file a formal complaint. "Bring any identification you have, and we'll need to review security footage from the ATM transactions," Robert explained. "If someone has been using your identity, this is a serious federal crime." I drove to the bank branch near my family's house, the same location where Emma and I had opened our joint account 3 years ago. The familiar lobby with its marble floors and potted plants now felt like a crime scene. Robert led me to a small office, where he pulled up security footage on his computer screen. The first video showed a figure approaching the ATM, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, making identification difficult. But when the person turned slightly toward the camera, my heart sank. It was Emma, my own sister, withdrawing money using a debit card with my information. "Do you recognize this individual?" Robert asked. I hesitated, knowing that my answer would potentially send Emma to prison. "That's my sister, Emma Thompson." Robert's expression grew grave. "I'm going to need you to sign an affidavit stating that you did not authorize these transactions and that you believe your sister has been committing identity theft." As I signed the legal documents, my hands trembled with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Emma hadn't just stolen money. She had deliberately destroyed my relationship with our mother to cover her crimes. Robert continued his investigation, discovering that Emma had used my personal information to open 2 credit card accounts without my knowledge. Both cards had been maxed out with cash advances, totaling nearly $8,000. "Your sister has been quite busy," Robert said grimly. "These are sophisticated financial crimes, not impulsive mistakes." I left the bank feeling nauseated and betrayed. Emma had been systematically destroying my financial reputation while playing the role of innocent victim at home. I tried calling my father's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His business trips often took him to remote construction sites with poor cell service. That afternoon, I drove back to the campus where Emma attended school, hoping to find answers. I parked outside the coffee shop, where she supposedly worked part-time, planning to ask her co-workers about her recent behavior. The manager, a woman in her 40s named Carol, looked confused when I asked about Emma. "Emma Thompson. She quit here 6 weeks ago. Said she had found a better-paying job, but she seemed evasive about the details." "Did she mention any financial problems, gambling maybe?" Carol's expression shifted to concern. "You know, there were a few times when Emma asked for advances on her paycheck. She seemed really stressed about money, but then suddenly she stopped worrying about it altogether. She even started buying coffee for other employees, which was strange, because she used to count every penny." I thanked Carol and drove to Emma's dormitory, hoping to speak with her roommate. The resident advisor let me into the building after I explained I was Emma's brother. Emma's roommate, a quiet girl named Jessica, seemed nervous when I introduced myself. "Is Emma in some kind of trouble?" Jessica asked immediately. "Why would you think that?" "She's been acting really strange lately. Staying out all night getting phone calls that make her cry, spending money like crazy, but then panicking about being broke. And she's been really secretive about where she goes." Jessica showed me some mail that had been delivered to Emma's dorm room. Mixed in with the usual college correspondence were several envelopes addressed to me, forwarded from my parents' house. Emma had been intercepting my mail for months. Inside the envelopes were bank statements, credit card offers, and financial documents that Emma had obviously been studying to learn how to impersonate me more effectively. Jessica, has Emma ever mentioned gambling or owing money to anyone? Jessica's face went pale. She did say something about having to pay someone back, and that she was in serious trouble if she couldn't get the money together. I thought maybe she meant student loans. As I drove back to Marcus's apartment, the pieces of Emma's deception became clearer. She had developed a gambling addiction, gotten in over her head with debts, and decided to steal from me rather than face the consequences. When the missing money from her college fund was discovered, she had manipulated the situation to make me look guilty while positioning herself as the victim. But why would my mother believe Emma's story so readily? Why hadn't she demanded more proof before throwing me out into the storm? That evening, Marcus helped me compile all the evidence I had gathered: bank records, security footage, witness statements from Emma's former co-workers. The case against her was overwhelming. "You need to call the police," Marcus said. "This isn't just about the money anymore. Emma has committed multiple felonies, and she's destroying your family to cover it up." I stared at the pile of evidence on Marcus's kitchen table. Calling the police would mean Emma would face serious criminal charges. She could go to prison. But if I didn't act, she would continue stealing and lying, probably escalating her crimes until she destroyed everyone around her. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The message made my skin crawl. Emma somehow knew I was investigating her, and she was threatening me to stay quiet. I looked at Marcus, who was reading the message over my shoulder. "Definitely call the police," he said firmly. "Your sister is dangerous." The next morning, I received an unexpected phone call from Sarah Mitchell, a friend from high school who worked as a teller at the bank branch near my family's house. Her voice was hushed and nervous when she identified herself. "Wesley, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I heard about what happened with your family. I thought you should know something." My heart started racing. Sarah had always been trustworthy, and she sounded genuinely concerned. "What is it, Sarah?" "Your mom came into the bank about 3 weeks ago. She seemed really agitated and kept asking about your account activity. She wanted to know if we had noticed anything unusual or suspicious." The information hit me like a punch to the stomach. 3 weeks ago was before Emma had accused me of stealing her money. My mother had been investigating my finances weeks before the supposed crime was even discovered. Did she say why she was asking? She mentioned that Emma had come to her with concerns about money missing from their shared account. But here's the thing, Wesley. Your mom seemed nervous, like she already knew something bad was going to happen. Sarah's revelation changed everything. My mother hadn't been surprised by Emma's accusations because she had been expecting them. She had been part of the setup from the beginning. "Sarah, did you tell my mom anything about my account?" "No, of course not. Bank privacy laws prevent me from sharing customer information, even with family members. But I did notice that she seemed relieved when I couldn't give her details." After hanging up, I sat in Marcus's apartment feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. My mother's quick acceptance of Emma's story hadn't been the result of a mother's protective instincts. She had known Emma was lying and had chosen to participate in the deception. But why would my mother sacrifice me to protect Emma? I decided to visit Mrs. Patterson, my old high school guidance counselor, who had maintained a close relationship with my family over the years. She lived in a small house near the school and often invited former students over for coffee when they were home from college. Mrs. Patterson welcomed me warmly, but I could see concern in her eyes when I explained why I was visiting. "Wesley, I've heard some troubling rumors about your family situation. I hope you know that I don't believe for a second that you would steal from Emma." "Mrs. Patterson, have you spoken with my mother recently? She seems convinced that I'm guilty." Mrs. Patterson's expression became uncomfortable, and she hesitated before answering. "Your mother did confide in me several months ago about some concerns she had regarding Emma. She mentioned that Emma had been struggling with some personal issues and that the family was trying to help her work through them." What kind of personal issues? Mrs. Patterson looked like she was wrestling with whether to reveal confidential information. Wesley, I probably shouldn't share this, but given the circumstances, I think you deserve to know. Your mother told me that Emma had developed a serious gambling problem. She had been caught using fake identification to get into casinos, and she owed money to some very dangerous people. The room seemed to spin around me. My mother had known about Emma's gambling addiction for months, which meant she also knew that Emma was likely responsible for the missing money. If Mom knew Emma was gambling, why would she believe that I stole the money? Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled with regret, as if she realized she had revealed more than she intended. Oh, Wesley, I think I've made a terrible mistake. Your mother made me promise not to tell anyone about Emma's problems. She said the family was handling it privately. But that doesn't explain why she would throw me out of the house. Mrs. Patterson sat down heavily in her recliner, looking older than her 65 years. Your mother mentioned that Emma had threatened to hurt herself if the gambling debts weren't paid. She was terrified that Emma might do something drastic. When Emma came up with a story about you stealing the money, your mother may have seen it as a way to protect her while buying time to figure out how to help her. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. My mother hadn't been deceived by Emma's lies. She had been complicit in them choosing to sacrifice my reputation and my relationship with the family to enable Emma's destructive behavior. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and left her house feeling hollow and angry. As I drove through my old neighborhood, I passed the house where I had grown up, where I had learned to ride a bike, and celebrated birthdays, and felt safe and loved. Now, it felt like a mausoleum of lies. My phone rang as I was sitting in the parking lot of a convenience store trying to collect my thoughts. The caller ID showed my father's number, and my heart leaped with hope. Dad, thank God you called. I need to explain what really happened. But the voice that answered wasn't my father's. It was Emma. Wesley, you need to stop stirring up trouble. Mom is having a nervous breakdown because of what you're doing. What I'm doing, Emma? You framed me for crimes you committed. You've been stealing from me for months. I don't know what you're talking about. You're obviously having some kind of mental breakdown. Dad is going to be so disappointed when he finds out how you've been acting. Emma's tone was calm and manipulative, completely different from the sobbing victim she had portrayed at home. I have bank records, Emma. Security footage. I know you've been using my identity to steal money. There was a long pause before Emma spoke again, and when she did, her voice had turned cold and threatening. If you try to cause problems for me, I'll tell everyone that you've been threatening to hurt me. I'll say you're dangerous and unstable. Who do you think they'll believe, the good daughter who stays home and helps the family, or the son who disappeared to college and only comes home when he wants money? The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. Emma wasn't just a gambling addict who had made some bad decisions. She was a skilled manipulator who had been orchestrating this entire situation to serve her own purposes. I realized that Emma had been planning this for months, carefully positioning herself as the innocent victim while building a case against me. She had convinced my mother to participate in the deception by threatening self-harm, exploiting our mother's love and fear. As I sat in that parking lot, watching normal families go about their daily routines, I understood that my family was irreparably damaged. The people I had trusted most in the world had chosen to destroy me, rather than face uncomfortable truths about Emma's behavior. But I also realized that I couldn't let them succeed. If I didn't fight back, Emma would continue manipulating and stealing until she destroyed other people's lives as well. My mother would continue enabling her destructive behavior until it consumed the entire family. I started my car and drove toward the casino where Marcus and I had seen Emma gambling in her social media posts. It was time to gather more evidence and build a case that even my mother couldn't ignore. The truth had to come out no matter how much it hurt. My father David returned from his business trip on a Friday evening, 3 days after I had been thrown out of the house. I knew he was back because Marcus drove by the house and saw his work truck parked in the driveway covered with dust from the Arizona construction sites where he had been working. I hadn't spoken to my father since the night I was banished. Emma had been intercepting his phone calls and presumably feeding him the same lies she had told our mother. I hoped that Dad would be more reasonable, more willing to hear my side of the story, but I was afraid to call him directly. Instead, I parked across the street from our house that evening, hidden behind Mrs. Henderson's large oak tree, waiting for an opportunity to approach him privately. The sight of my childhood home with its warm, glowing windows felt like looking at a life that had belonged to someone else. Through the living room window, I could see my father sitting in his favorite recliner, still wearing his work clothes. He looked exhausted, probably catching up on the family crisis he had returned to. My mother was moving around the kitchen, presumably making him dinner after his long trip. Around 8 o'clock, Emma's friends arrived for what appeared to be a small party. I recognized 2 of them from her high school graduation, Kelly, a blonde girl with an expensive handbag, and Amber, who was always posting selfies from luxury restaurants on social media. The 3 girls gathered in the living room with drinks and snacks, laughing and talking loudly enough that their voices carried through the closed windows. My father had moved to the kitchen, giving them space to socialize. What happened next changed everything. I watched through the window as Emma began gesturing dramatically clearly, telling a story that had her friends hanging on every word. Even from across the street, I could see she was enjoying being the center of attention. Kelly said something that made Emma laugh so hard she doubled over. Then, Emma stood up and began what appeared to be a theatrical reenactment of some event. She pointed toward the front door, then mimicked throwing objects, her face twisted into an exaggerated expression of anger. Through the thin glass of the window, I could hear fragments of Emma's performance. "You should have seen his face when Mom threw him out," and "I can't believe he actually thought we would believe his pathetic excuses." My blood turned to ice as I realized Emma was entertaining her friends by mocking my banishment from the family. She was laughing about the most devastating experience of my life, as if it were a comedy show. But Emma didn't realize that our father had returned from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway behind her, listening to every word. I could see Dad's face clearly from my position across the street. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to unmistakable fury as he heard Emma's gleeful recounting of my exile. And the best part, Emma continued still performing for her audience, is that Mom totally fell for it. I told her Wesley stole my college money and she didn't even ask for proof. She just started screaming at him and throwing his stuff outside. Kelly clapped her hands in delight. "That's genius! So you don't have to worry about sharing your inheritance anymore." Exactly, Wesley always acted like he was so much better than me, because he got good grades and went to college. But now Mom sees who the real golden child is. Amber raised her drink in a toast to Emma for finally getting rid of her annoying brother. The 3 girls clinked their glasses together, laughing hysterically. Emma was beaming with pride at her successful manipulation. But then, she turned around and saw our father standing behind her. The color drained from Emma's face instantly. Her friends, sensing the sudden tension, stopped laughing and looked confused. Dad's voice was low and controlled, which I knew from experience meant he was absolutely furious. "Emma, I think your friends need to leave now." Kelly and Amber gathered their purses quickly, mumbling apologies and goodbyes as they hurried toward the front door. Emma remained frozen in the living room, staring at our father like a deer caught in headlights. Through the window, I could see Dad walking slowly toward Emma, his work boots heavy on the hardwood floor. "Did you just say that you lied to your mother about Wesley stealing money?" Emma's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Dad, you don't understand. I can explain everything." "I understand perfectly. You framed your brother for a crime he didn't commit, and you've been laughing about it with your friends." My mother appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the sound of raised voices. When she saw Dad's expression and Emma's terrified face, she immediately moved to protect Emma. "David, you just got home. You're tired and upset. Let's discuss this calmly tomorrow." But Dad turned to face my mother with an expression I had never seen before. Pure disappointment mixed with anger. Janet, did you know Emma was lying when you threw Wesley out of the house? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could see my mother's internal struggle as she decided how to answer. David, you don't understand how complicated this situation is. Emma has been going through a difficult time, and she needed our support. Our support by destroying Wesley's life and reputation. Emma suddenly burst into tears, dropping to her knees in what appeared to be a calculated display of remorse. Daddy, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I was scared and confused, and I didn't know what to do. But Dad wasn't buying her performance. He had heard her laughing with her friends, celebrating her successful manipulation of the family. Emma, where is the money you claim Wesley stole? The question was simple and direct, cutting through all of Emma's theatrical sobbing. What do you mean? If Wesley stole $5,000 from your account, where is that money now? What did he supposedly spend it on? Emma looked desperately at our mother, seeking help with an answer. But even Mom seemed to realize that the lie was falling apart. I don't know. He must have hidden it somewhere. Dad pulled out his cell phone and held it up. Emma, I'm going to call Wesley right now, and if he can prove he didn't steal your money, you're going to tell me exactly what really happened. The threat sent Emma into a full panic. She grabbed Dad's arm, her carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. Please don't call him. I can't handle this right now. I'm having a breakdown. But Dad gently removed her hands from his arm and dialed my number. When my phone rang, I was still sitting in my car across the street, watching the family drama unfold through the living room window. I answered immediately. Wesley, where are you right now? Dad's voice was tight with controlled emotion. I'm close by, Dad. Do you want me to come home? There was a long pause before he answered. Yes, son. Come home right now. We need to have a family meeting. As I hung up the phone and started my car, I could see Emma collapsing onto the couch while my mother tried to comfort her. Dad stood in the center of the living room, looking like a man who had discovered that everything he believed about his family was a lie. I drove across the street and parked in my usual spot in the driveway, the same place I had parked 3 days earlier when my life fell apart. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't walking into an ambush. I was walking into a reckoning. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage before walking to the front door of the house where I had been raised. The same door that had been slammed in my face 3 days earlier now felt like the entrance to a courtroom where justice would finally be served. When I knocked, my father opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting by the entrance. His weathered face showed exhaustion from travel and shock from what he had discovered, but his eyes held a warmth that had been missing from my mother's gaze. Come in, son. We need to talk. The living room felt smaller than I remembered, charged with tension and unspoken accusations. My mother sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, her arms wrapped protectively around Emma, who was still crying into a handful of tissues. The scene was almost identical to the one I had walked into 3 days earlier, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. Wesley. My father began, his voice measured and careful. I owe you an apology for not being here when this situation exploded. I should have been available to hear your side of the story. Emma looked up sharply. Dad, you can't believe his lies. He's been acting crazy ever since he got kicked out. He's been threatening me and stalking our family. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, making sure it was visible to everyone in the room. Emma, you called me yesterday and threatened to tell people I was dangerous if I didn't stop investigating the missing money. Would you like me to play that recording for Dad? The color drained from Emma's face. She hadn't realized I had recorded our conversation. My father's expression hardened. You threatened your brother? I was scared, Emma whispered. Wesley has been acting unpredictable, and I didn't know what he might do. I opened my laptop and pulled up the evidence I had compiled over the past 3 days. Bank records, security footage, witness statements from Emma's former employer, photos of her expensive purchases that didn't match her claimed income. Dad, I can prove that Emma has been stealing from me for months. She used my personal information to open credit cards and make ATM withdrawals. The bank has security footage of her using cards with my name on them. My father studied the documents carefully, his expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. As a successful contractor, he understood financial records and could see the pattern of fraud clearly. "Janet," he said quietly, "did you know about any of this when you decided to throw Wesley out?" My mother's defensive posture crumbled slightly. Emma came to me in tears, saying she was scared of Wesley. She showed me bank statements that seemed to prove he had taken her money. "But did you verify those statements? Did you call the bank to confirm the transactions were legitimate?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I pulled up the security footage on my laptop and turned the screen toward my parents. "This is from the ATM outside the pawn shop on Colfax Avenue. The timestamp shows last Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon. That's when I was in my organic chemistry lab with 30 other students." The video clearly showed Emma approaching the machine, inserting a card, and withdrawing money. Her face was partially obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap, but her distinctive walk and mannerisms were unmistakable. Emma jumped up from the couch suddenly. "That's not me. Someone is trying to frame me now. This is all a conspiracy." But her panicked reaction only made her look more guilty. My father stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street, where we used to play catch when I was young. When he turned back to face the room, his expression was that of a man who had made a difficult decision. "Emma, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me honestly whether you took money from Wesley's accounts." Emma's theatrical crying intensified. "Daddy, how can you believe him over me? I'm your little girl. I would never lie to you. That's not what I heard you telling your friends an hour ago." The room fell silent, except for Emma's sobbing. My mother reached for Emma's hand, but Emma pulled away and ran toward the staircase. "This family is falling apart, and it's all Wesley's fault," she screamed before disappearing upstairs. My father and I were left alone with my mother, who looked like she had aged 10 years in the past week. "Janet," my father said gently, "we need to discuss how we're going to handle this situation. Emma has committed serious crimes, and Wesley deserves an apology." My mother's face crumpled as she finally acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered. "Emma has been acting strange for months, staying out all night, getting mysterious phone calls, spending money we knew she didn't have. But when she came to me crying about Wesley stealing from her, I wanted to believe it was true, because the alternative was too frightening." "What alternative?" "That Emma was in serious trouble, possibly with dangerous people, and that I had failed as a mother to protect her from making terrible decisions." The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. My mother had chosen to sacrifice me rather than face the possibility that Emma was beyond her help. My father sat down next to my mother and took her hands in his. "Janet, by enabling Emma's lies, you've made her problems worse. She's not going to get better until she faces consequences for her actions." From upstairs came the sound of Emma's bedroom door slamming, followed by muffled phone conversation. I wondered if she was calling someone for help or advice on how to handle her exposed deception. "What happens now?" my mother asked, looking between my father and me with desperate hope that we could somehow fix everything. I opened my laptop again and showed them the police report I had filed that morning. "I've already contacted law enforcement about the identity theft and fraud. Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit will be calling the house tomorrow to schedule interviews with everyone." My mother gasped. "Wesley, you called the police. Emma could go to jail." "Emma should go to jail," my father said firmly. "What she's done is serious criminal behavior, not a family disagreement that we can solve privately." At that moment, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser parked in our driveway. My father looked confused. "Did someone call the police?" Before anyone could answer, there was a firm knock on the front door. My father answered it to find 2 officers standing on our front porch. "Good evening, sir. We're looking for Emma Thompson. We have a warrant for her arrest." The words hit the room like lightning. Emma must have heard the officers from upstairs, because we could hear her footsteps running across the floor above us. "Officers, may I ask what the charges are?" my father asked. "Identity theft, wire fraud, and computer crimes. We received evidence from the victim earlier today." I realized that Detective Martinez had moved faster than I had expected. The case against Emma must have been even stronger than I thought. "Emma is upstairs," my father said quietly. "Let me call her down." But when Dad called Emma's name, there was no response. One of the officers asked permission to go upstairs, and my father led them up to Emma's room. The bedroom door was locked, and Emma refused to respond to knocking. Finally, my father used the master key he kept for emergencies and opened the door. Emma was sitting on her bed with her suitcase, apparently having been packing to run away. When she saw the police officers, she burst into fresh tears. "This is all a mistake," she sobbed. "My brother is lying about everything because he's jealous of me." But the officers had evidence that spoke louder than her denials. Within 15 minutes, Emma was handcuffed and being led to the police car, while my mother watched in horror from the living room window. As the police car pulled away with Emma in the back seat, the three of us stood in the quiet house, trying to process what had just happened. The family that had existed just a week earlier was gone forever, but for the first time since I had been thrown out in the rain, I felt like justice was finally being served. Emma spent the weekend in county jail because her arraignment hearing wasn't scheduled until Monday morning. The silence in our house felt oppressive, like the calm after a tornado had torn through our lives and left destruction in its wake. My father had moved back into the master bedroom, but my mother slept in the guest room, unable to face him after her role in the family's destruction became clear. I stayed in my old room, feeling like a stranger in the place where I had grown up. On Sunday evening, the jail's phone system connected Emma to our house phone. My father answered, and Emma's voice was small and frightened, completely different from the confident manipulator who had been laughing with her friends just days earlier. "Daddy, please help me. This place is horrible and I'm scared." My father put the call on speaker so my mother and I could hear the conversation. "Emma, we need to talk honestly about what you've done. The police have overwhelming evidence against you. I know I made some mistakes, but I never meant for things to go this far. I was desperate, and I didn't know what else to do." This was the first time Emma had admitted any wrongdoing, and I could see a flicker of hope in my mother's eyes that maybe Emma was finally ready to tell the truth. "What were you desperate about?" I asked, speaking into the phone for the first time since she had been arrested. There was a long silence before Emma answered, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I owe money to some very bad people, Wesley. More money than you can imagine." "How much money?" Another pause. $47,000. The number hit the room like a physical blow. My father sat down heavily in his chair, and my mother covered her mouth with her hands. "47,000, my father repeated. "Emma, how did you accumulate that kind of debt?" "It started small, just $20 bets on online poker games. But then I started winning, and I thought I could make enough money to pay for college without asking you and Mom for help." Emma's story poured out in a rush, as if she had been holding back the truth for months and couldn't contain it anymore. "I won $3,000 in one night, and I felt like I had figured out the system. So I started betting bigger amounts using student loan money that was supposed to go toward tuition and housing." "When did you start losing?" I asked. "It happened gradually at first. I would lose a few hundred, then win it back, then lose a little more. But I always thought the next big win was just around the corner." My mother was crying quietly, finally understanding the scope of Emma's deception. "When did you start stealing from Wesley?" my father asked. "About 6 months ago. I had lost most of my student loan money, and the gambling site was offering me credit to keep playing. I convinced myself that I could win everything back if I just had a little more capital to work with." "So you used Wesley's personal information to get that capital?" "It seemed like a temporary solution. I thought I could pay him back before he ever found out. But the debts kept growing, and then the people I owed money to started threatening me. Emma's voice became strained with terror, as she described receiving phone calls in the middle of the night, messages threatening violence if she didn't pay her debts immediately. They said they knew where I lived, where I went to school. They described Mom's car and said they had been watching our house. The revelation explained why Emma had been so desperate to find someone else to blame for the missing money. She hadn't just been covering her gambling addiction. She had been trying to protect the family from dangerous criminals who were demanding payment. "Emma, why didn't you come to us for help instead of framing Wesley?" my mother asked through her tears. I was ashamed. And I was scared that if I told you the truth, you would stop loving me. It seemed easier to make Wesley look guilty than to admit what I had become. My father's voice was heavy with sadness. "Emma, by lying about Wesley, you've made everything infinitely worse. Now you're facing felony charges that could send you to prison for years. I know, Daddy. I know I've destroyed everything. But Wesley, I need you to drop the charges against me. If I go to prison, the people I owe money to will assume I'm never going to pay them back. They'll come after you and Mom and Dad to collect the debt." The manipulation in Emma's request was obvious. Even from jail, she was trying to use fear and guilt to control the family's response to her crimes. "Emma," I said carefully, "if these people are threatening our family, we need to contact the police and the FBI. This is organized criminal activity. You don't understand. These aren't local thugs. They're part of a sophisticated network that operates online casinos and loan sharking operations. The police can't protect us from them." My father stood up and began pacing the living room, his contractor's mind working through the logistics of the situation. "Emma, even if Wesley dropped the charges, which he shouldn't do, how would that solve the debt problem? You still owe $47,000 to dangerous people." "I have a plan. If I can get out of jail, I can get a job and start paying them back gradually. I've already talked to some of the other inmates who have experience with these situations." The absurdity of Emma's proposed solution was staggering. She thought she could get a minimum wage job and somehow pay back nearly $50,000 to violent criminals, while they waited patiently for their money. "Emma, that's not realistic. These people aren't going to wait years for you to pay them back with money from working at a coffee shop." "Then what do you suggest I do?" Emma screamed into the phone. "Should I just give up and let them kill me?" The conversation was spiraling into hysteria, and I realized that Emma's gambling addiction had damaged her ability to think rationally about consequences and solutions. "Emma, the first thing you need to do is admit the full scope of what you've done. Not just to us, but to the police and the court system. If you cooperate with law enforcement, they might be able to help you with the threatening creditors." "I can't do that, Wesley. If I give the police information about the gambling operation, those people will definitely try to hurt our family in retaliation." The phone call ended abruptly when Emma's allotted time expired, leaving the three of us sitting in stunned silence. My father looked at my mother and me with grim determination. "Tomorrow morning, I'm calling the FBI to report the threats Emma described. And I'm calling our lawyer to discuss how to protect this family from the consequences of Emma's choices." "David," my mother said quietly, "what if Emma is right? What if Wesley dropping the charges is the only way to keep us safe?" My father's response was immediate and firm. "Janet, Emma created this crisis through her lies and criminal behavior. We're not going to solve it by enabling more lies and criminal behavior. Wesley was the victim here, and he has every right to pursue justice." I looked at my parents, both of whom had aged visibly over the past week, and made a decision that would determine the course of our family's future. "I'm not dropping the charges," I said. "Emma needs to face consequences for what she's done, not just to me, but to everyone she's hurt through her deception. And if these creditors are real threats, then law enforcement needs to know about them." My mother started crying again, but my father nodded approvingly. "That's the right decision, son. We'll face whatever comes next as a family, but we're going to do it honestly this time. As we prepared for what would likely be months of legal proceedings, investigations, and potential danger, I realized that Emma's arrest had been just the beginning of our journey toward justice and healing. The hardest part was still ahead of us. 6 months later, I stood in the hallway outside Courtroom B at the Jefferson County Courthouse, waiting for Emma's sentencing hearing to begin. The past half year had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, family therapy sessions, and gradual healing that had transformed our family in ways I never could have imagined. Emma had eventually pled guilty to identity theft, wire fraud, and computer crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence and cooperation with the FBI's investigation into the online gambling operation that had entrapped her. The federal agents discovered that Emma had been one of dozens of young people targeted by a sophisticated criminal network that deliberately created gambling addictions and then offered illegal loans with devastating terms. The criminals who had been threatening Emma were arrested in a coordinated raid across 3 states, removing the immediate danger to our family. Emma's cooperation with the investigation had been genuinely helpful to law enforcement, providing evidence that led to the prosecution of people who had victimized many other families. My father David had spent those 6 months rebuilding relationships and trust within our family. He sold one of his construction company's vehicles to pay back the money Emma had stolen from me, refusing to let me bear the financial consequences of her crimes. More importantly, he had insisted that our family attend weekly therapy sessions to address the communication failures and enabling behaviors that had allowed Emma's problems to escalate unchecked. My mother Janet had undergone the most dramatic transformation of anyone. The guilt and shame of her role in my banishment had motivated her to examine her parenting patterns and her tendency to protect Emma from consequences. She had enrolled in a support group for families affected by gambling addiction and had become an advocate for other parents struggling with similar issues. During our family therapy sessions, Mom had written me a lengthy letter, taking full responsibility for her failure to investigate Emma's accusations before throwing me out of the house. She acknowledged that her favoritism toward Emma had been damaging to both of her children and committed to treating us as equals going forward. The letter had been one of the most difficult things I had ever read, but also one of the most healing. My mother's willingness to examine her own mistakes and make genuine changes had allowed us to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. Emma herself had changed dramatically during her time in jail and her subsequent enrollment in a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. The confident manipulator who had laughed about my exile with her friends had been replaced by a young woman who was genuinely remorseful and committed to making amends for the harm she had caused. She had written me dozens of letters during her incarceration, progressing from desperate pleas for forgiveness to thoughtful reflections on her behavior and its impact on our family. Emma had come to understand that her gambling addiction had been symptomatic of deeper issues with impulse control, emotional regulation, and her relationship with money and risk. Most importantly, Emma had expressed genuine gratitude that I had pursued criminal charges against her, recognizing that facing consequences had probably saved her life. Without intervention, she would have continued escalating her criminal behavior until she either ended up dead or in prison for much longer. As we waited for the hearing to begin, Emma approached me in the hallway, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Her appearance was starkly different from the glamorous social media photos she used to post. She looked younger, somehow, more genuine, stripped of the artificial confidence that had masked her problems. "Wesley, thank you for being here today," she said quietly. "I wanted to hear what the judge had to say, and I wanted to make sure you knew that I don't hate you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that everything I put this family through has taught me who I really want to be. I'm not going to waste the second chance I'm getting." The judge sentenced Emma to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment. She would also be required to perform 500 hours of community service, speaking to young people about the dangers of gambling addiction. Emma accepted the sentence without complaint, understanding that it was both a punishment and an opportunity for continued healing. After the hearing, our family gathered for lunch at a small restaurant near the courthouse. The conversation was different from our old family dynamics. More honest, more respectful, less focused on protecting anyone from uncomfortable truths. Dad told us that his construction business was experiencing its most successful year ever, partly because the stress of our family crisis had motivated him to focus more intensely on his work. He had also hired 2 new employees, expanding his company's capacity to take on larger projects. Mom shared that her involvement with the gambling addiction support group had inspired her to return to school to get certified as a family counselor. She wanted to use her experience to help other families navigate similar crises without the destructive, enabling behaviors she had exhibited. I talked about my own plans. I had changed my major from geology to criminal justice, inspired by my experience with the legal system and the FBI agents who had handled Emma's case. I wanted to work in financial crimes investigation, helping other families recover from fraud and identity theft. As we finished our meal, Mom reached across the table and took my hand. "Wesley, I know I can never fully make up for what I put you through, but I want you to know that watching you handle this crisis with integrity and strength has made me incredibly proud to be your mother." The words meant more to me than any apology or explanation. My mother's pride felt genuine because it was based on my character rather than my achievements or my ability to meet her expectations. 6 months after that lunch, Emma was released from prison and enrolled in a transitional program that provided housing and job training for people recovering from addiction. She found work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization that helped former inmates reintegrate into society using her experience with financial systems in a positive way. Emma and I began meeting monthly for coffee, slowly rebuilding our relationship as siblings rather than adversaries. She never asked me to forget what had happened or pretend that our family hadn't been damaged by her choices. Instead, she focused on demonstrating through her actions that she had learned from her mistakes and was committed to living differently. The last time we met, Emma told me that she had been contacted by several young people who had heard her speak about gambling addiction. They were struggling with similar problems and wanted guidance about getting help before their situations became as destructive as hers had been. "I never thought my worst mistakes could become useful to other people," she said. "But apparently there's something powerful about hearing from someone who actually went through the consequences and came out the other side." Our family was forever changed by the crisis Emma had created, but we were stronger and more honest than we had ever been before. The lies and manipulation that had nearly destroyed us had been replaced by communication patterns based on truth-telling and accountability. I graduated from college with a degree in criminal justice and was accepted into the FBI's financial crimes training program. During my application interview, I spoke about my personal experience as a victim of identity theft and fraud, explaining how it had motivated my career choice. The interviewer, a veteran agent named Patricia Collins, listened thoughtfully to my story. "Mr. Thompson, it's unusual for someone to pursue prosecution against a family member, especially in cases involving addiction. What made you decide not to protect your sister from legal consequences?" I realized that protecting her from consequences wasn't actually protecting her at all. It was enabling her to continue destructive behaviors that would eventually hurt more people, including herself. Sometimes love means allowing people to face the results of their choices, even when it's painful. Agent Collins nodded approvingly. "That kind of moral clarity will serve you well in this field. Financial crimes often involve family members victimizing each other, and investigators need to remain objective about justice, regardless of personal relationships." I started my FBI training 6 months later, carrying with me the lessons I had learned about truth consequences and the sometimes painful process of healing fractured relationships. My family story didn't end with Emma's sentencing, or my graduation, or even our gradual reconciliation. It continued as we each worked to become better versions of ourselves, informed by our experience with betrayal and recovery. The young man who had been thrown out into the rain because of his sister's lies had become someone who understood that justice isn't about revenge, but about creating accountability that allows genuine healing and growth to occur. And sometimes when families are willing to face difficult truths and do the hard work of changing destructive patterns, everyone can emerge stronger than they were before the crisis began. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and holding them accountable for their actions? It's one of the hardest decisions we can face as family members, but sometimes it's the most loving thing we can do. I'd love to hear your thoughts about finding that balance between compassion and consequences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice when the people closest to you let you down. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics, because sometimes we all need to be reminded that standing up for what's right, even when it's painful, is worth it in the end. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can share our experiences and support each other through life's most challenging moments. Remember that healing is always possible when we're willing to face the truth and do the work to build something better from the pieces of what was broken. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love, but never forget that real love sometimes requires tough choices that serve everyone's long-term well-being rather than their immediate comfort.